Now that Israel has achieved at least a temporary reprieve from fighting its multi-front war against Iran and its proxies Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis, the world's focus has now turned its attention to the most controversial territories in the whole Middle East, and that's the Gaza and the West Bank. So in today's Bible study at the Prophecy Depot program, we're going to be talking about the geopolitical and prophetic roles of these two very important but highly contested territories. So stay tuned. Okay, let's turn our attention first to the West Bank. On July 23rd of 2025, the Knesset passed a resolution supporting annexation of the West Bank, and then on October 22nd of 2025, the bill was granted preliminary passage in a close vote of 25 to 24. Additionally, the Knesset at that time also passed a bill to extend Israeli sovereignty over the Ma'ale Adumim settlement, the E1 zone near Jerusalem. You see the Middle East Eye reports in a headline, Israel passes preliminary bill to annex the occupied West Bank. You see a map there held by Smotrich, and the blue area there between the Dead Sea and Jerusalem is that E1 zone. Is very strategic part of the West Bank. I'll be talking more about the importance of that shortly into this program. Now, when this bill was passed, Donald Trump was asked how he felt about that, and he was not in favor of it. And we'll watch hear what he has to say about that.
The West Bank is, don't worry about the West Bank. Israel's not going to do anything with the West Bank, okay? Don't worry about it. Is that your question? They're not going to do anything with the West Bank. Don't worry about it. Israel's doing very well. They're not going to do anything with it.
So is President Trump correct when he says it's not going to happen? Israel's not going to annex the West Bank? Well, perhaps not during his term, but according to Bible prophecies in Obadiah, Jeremiah, and Zephaniah, sometime before the tribulation, Israel's going to annex a whole lot more than just the West Bank. You can see on the map here all these areas shaded in blue, including the West Bank. Israel's going to annex all these territories, and like I said, probably before the tribulation period. A little later in this program, I'll be identifying these specific territories for you in relationship to these prophecies. Okay, so let's put this into perspective. Although the international community identifies this as the West Bank and calls it disputed or occupied territory, according to Israel, it represents its biblical heartland of Judea and Samaria, with a long-standing history dating as far back as 930 BC, following the death of King Solomon, which at that time the kingdom of Israel became divided into two separate kingdoms. Israel was the northern kingdom, and Judah was the southern kingdom. And around 1880, the wicked king of the north, Omri, we're told in 1 Kings 16:24, bought the territory and renamed it as Samaria. Then after the IDF won its victory in 1967 in the Six-Day War, Israel reinstated the names of Judea and Samaria. Now, a majority of the international community wants Judea and Samaria to become the bedrock for a future Palestinian state. That's why they call it occupied land, disputed territory. They call it the West Bank instead of Judea and Samaria. They won't recognize that. They also call the Jewish cities inside the area as settlements rather than, bona fide cities. Here's an interesting quote from U.S. Ambassador to Israel, Mike Huckabee, reported on June 10th of 2025 in The Guardian. The headline reads, U.S. Ambassador to Israel says U.S. no longer pursuing a goal of an independent Palestinian state. Now, this is a major shift from former administrations, from Obama and all of his predecessors. He goes on to say, I think Israel has the title deed to Judea and Samaria, Huckabee said at the time. There are certain words I refuse to use. There is no such thing as a West Bank. It's Judea and Samaria. There's no such thing as a settlement. They're communities, they're neighborhoods, they're cities, they're Jewish cities. Again, the world wants to call them settlements and disputed territory. Now, I want to turn our attention back to the significance of the annexation bill passed by the Knesset on October 22nd of the Ma'ale Adumim block inside of Judea and Samaria. You notice that's what the E1 zone is now. That E1 zone, housing and building that area was frozen for almost 20 years until August 13th of 2025. Finance Minister Smotrich announced tenders for about 3,400 units, housing units, new units to be put in there. And essentially this would cut off the ability for a Palestinian state having a capital in East Jerusalem. Here's a little clip of what it was, how he felt about that when he did this.
The Israeli cabinet minister and settler leader pushing the expansion, Bezalel Smotrich, is on the record saying it will bury the idea of a Palestinian state.
Now, Smotrich is one of the strongest advocates in Israel for the annexing of the West Bank. Here's an article in September of 2025 reported in the Times of Israel. The headline reads, Smotrich proposes annexing 82% of the West Bank in a bid to prevent a Palestinian state. Now, Smotrich has high hopes for the Trump administration. He believes with a little educating, Donald Trump will understand the significance of annexing the West Bank. Case in point, an article on October 29th written by JNS, headline reads, Smotrich, Trump can't support sovereignty if he doesn't know this is what the nation of Israel wants. Article goes on to read, President Donald Trump and his administration would support Israeli sovereignty over Judea and Samaria if Israel properly explained how crucial it is. Trump didn't originally understand how important it was for the Israeli society to bring the hostages home. He didn't understand why we insisted on this. He wanted Israel to just open the gates of hell on Gaza and to finish the war. He states further, it was a campaign led by the Hostages and Missing Families Forum and Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu that convinced Trump that being on Israel's side meant supporting the return of the hostages. Therefore, Israel must help Trump understand that being on Israel's side this time means supporting the implementation of sovereignty over Judea and Samaria. He's very confident, he goes on to say in the article, I'm 100% certain that if we persevere in this, in the Knesset, in the street, in the legal realm, and in the media, if President Trump and his staff would understand how crucial, important, and positive this move is, and how this establishes our right to all the land of Israel, I'm convinced he will support this. That being said, the finance minister emphasized that implementing sovereignty is not conditional on Trump's support. So, see, he thinks Donald Trump just needs a little bit of educating to come on board and support this. But let's see how easy that's going to be when we look at this next clip.
Did you promise leaders this week that you would not allow Israel to annex the West Bank? And is that something that you
I will not allow Israel to annex the West Bank. No, I will not allow it. It's not going to happen.
Did you speak with Netanyahu about this directly?
Yeah, but I'm not going to allow it. Whether I spoke to him or not, I did. But I'm not allowing Israel to annex the West Bank.
So President Trump is very adamant about not allowing the annexation of the West Bank. But let's say Smotrich gets him to reconsider. Even then, he still has other people within the Trump administration, Vice President Vance and Marco Rubio, that he also has to convince to change their position on that.
Yeah, go ahead. We'll do. Yeah.
The West Bank vote yesterday that took place while you were in the country.
Oh yeah, that was weird. I was sort of confused by that. Now I actually asked somebody about it, and they told me that it was a symbolic vote, some symbolic vote to recognize or a symbolic vote to annex the West Bank. I mean, what I would say to that is when I asked about it, somebody told me that it was a political stunt, that it had no practical significance. It was purely symbolic. I mean, look, if it was a political stunt, it was a very stupid political stunt, and I personally take some insult to it. The West Bank is not going to be annexed by Israel. The policy of the Trump administration is that the West Bank will not be annexed by Israel. That will continue to be our policy. And if people want to take symbolic votes, they can do that. But we certainly weren't happy about it. Thank you.
Okay, so now let's turn our attention to the significance of Gaza. In so doing, we might just come to understand why President Trump is so adamant about not allowing the annexation of the West Bank. Recently, he proposed his 20-point Gaza plan, which calls for the IDF to withdraw and an international stabilization force to take over. Also calls for interfaith dialogue and opens a path to a Palestinian statehood. Point number 19 clarifies, it says, while Gaza redevelopment advances and when the Palestinian Authority reform program is faithfully carried out, the conditions may finally be in place for a credible pathway to Palestinian self-determination and statehood, a Palestinian state, which we recognize as the aspiration of the Palestinian people. Now, the stabilization force, international stabilization force, consists of, so far, Egypt, Qatar, UAE, Turkey, Azerbaijan, Indonesia, Pakistan, Australia, Malaysia, Canada, and France, just to name who's on the list presently. Israel is very concerned about Qatar and Turkey having any military or security presence in the Gaza. They've already voiced their concerns about that. It's also important to note that all of these countries want a Palestinian state. They are all signed on in September 2025, the UN General Assembly, when they adopted the New York Declaration, which was a resolution for a two-state solution, a Palestinian state, making them, now there's 157 countries out of the 193 UN countries that acknowledge the Palestinian state are ready to accept that. So why are all these countries so interested in the Gaza? Maybe this next clip will help us kind of understand.
A brand new trade route that is both marine and land that would start in India, go through Saudi Arabia, and leave Israel to Europe. This would be an alternative to the old trade route, which led through the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, which was very unstable next to Yemen, and then go through the Suez Canal. But now there is a push to create a new trade route called the India-Middle East-Europe Economic Corridor. And it is the one that Netanyahu spoke about at the UN.
Through the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Israel, to Europe. This is an extraordinary change, a monumental change.
The plan to build this link was approved by the European Union, Saudi Arabia, India, and the United States in September 2023. And then this happened. Now guys, remember, for this plan to work, you had to have Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and Israel cooperating together. And in September 2023, it was really close for Saudi Arabia to join the Abrahamic Accords and make this possible. But there were also nations that were not happy about this new economic plan. Iran saw it as a threat to the regional power. And for China, it is a rival to the Belt and Road Initiative, which also is an economic plan announced by China in 2013, a land trade route that goes through Kazakhstan, Russia, Belarus, Poland, and Germany. Now, because Russia began a full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, and Belarus became a vassal ally of Russia, this trade route was also limited. A war with Hamas is followed by a war with Iran, which is very close to developing its own nuclear weapons. But as we remember, this is prevented by a joint Israeli-United States strikes on their nuclear facilities. Iran was very close to developing a nuclear weapon that would be a threat not only to Israel but also other Arab countries. That's why it had to be prevented. And Trump himself said that this historical announcement of the peace deal could not have happened if Iran's nuclear capabilities would not be knocked out.
Well, I'll tell you, I think it really started when we took out the nuclear capability of Iran. When you look at what they had.
So guys, let's just look at the timeline. In 2022, Russia begins a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. This is followed by September 2023, which is the announcement of the India-Middle East-Europe corridor, which then, shortly after, Saudi Arabia is expected to join the Abrahamic Accords to make it happen. But then we have a sudden attack on Israel by Hamas, which stops the whole process. The war between Israel and Iran starts, and then we have the famous Operation Midnight Hammer, where the United States strike Iran's nuclear facilities. And finally, on October 13th, 2025, Hamas releases all the living hostages from Gaza, and a new peace plan is announced by Trump, which basically means a return to the India-Middle East-Europe corridor initiative. But again guys, for this to work, you gotta have peace in Gaza. Otherwise, this whole plan doesn't make any sense. And Gaza will be a problem if it will remain in its current state, meaning a pile of rubble. And this is why very ambitious plans have been proposed to rebuild Gaza. But to transform Gaza, you not only need a lot of money. The World Bank estimates that you would need over $53 billion to rebuild Gaza, but you also need to get rid of Hamas.
The implementation of Trump's Gaza plan is getting off to a sluggish start. It's not necessarily going to be a smooth and easy process. There's already pushback. The Credo reports on November 2nd of 2025, Washington's new Gaza project meets Gulf pushback. Here's some of the reasons stated in the article. These nations are reluctant to assist without a clear agreement with Hamas to hand over its weapons. They also want to first deploy their forces on the east of the line to replace Israeli troops. Another concern is Tel Aviv could house Israelis in the new neighborhoods, leaving Palestinians to languish in tents. The Gaza is represented the only patch of territorial contiguity for a Palestinian state. This could end up creating what the Palestinians feared. What they fear the most is not being able to have a Palestinian state and languishing in tents. Languishing in tents is really nothing new to the Palestinians. This is the very condition they found themselves in 1948 after the Arab-Israeli War of that year when Israel defeated the Arabs. They became refugees dwelling in tent-like communities. I believe this condition was predicted over 3,000 years ago in Psalm 83 verse 6, where they're called the tents of Edom. Now the Edomites today have ethnical representation in the Palestinians. And this prophecy talks about an Arab confederacy that wants to destroy the nation of Israel and banner the plight of the tents of Edom, the refugee conditions. I believe it was also prophesied about in two other places, talking about them becoming despised and made small among the nations. Jeremiah 49:15 talks about the Edomites. It says, "For indeed I will make you, Edom, small among the nations, despised among men." These are the tents of Edom, which I've been talking about. Obadiah echoes the same sentiment. Obadiah 1:2 says, "Behold, I will make you small among the nations. You, Edom, shall be greatly despised." Now, the Palestinian prognosis is very, very grim. According to Obadiah chapter 1, verse 18, which states, "The house of Jacob shall be a fire," that would be the Israeli Defense Forces, "and the house of Joseph a flame," that would also be the IDF. "But the house of Esau shall be stubble, and no survivor shall remain of the house of Esau, for the Lord has spoken." I put Palestinians in there as the descendants of Esau. Esau fathered the Edomites. We've been talking about the tents of Edom. I'm not saying all Palestinians are Edomite descent. I personally believe a vast majority of them are. But their future is very, very grim, according to Obadiah 1, verse 18. President Trump is on the record for saying he will not allow Israel to annex the West Bank. He says it will not happen. But here's what I believe the Bible proves him to be incorrect. We read Obadiah 1:18, which talked about the Palestinian prognosis, where Israel will soundly defeat the descendants of Esau, the Palestinians per se. In the aftermath, we find out that Israel is going to annex a lot of territory. Obadiah 1, verses 19 through 20 reads as follows: "Those of the Negev shall possess Mount Esau, and those of the Shephelah shall possess the land of the Philistines. They shall possess the land of Ephraim and the land of Samaria. And Benjamin shall possess Gilead. The exiles of this host of the people of Israel shall possess the land of the Canaanites as far as Zarephath, and the exiles of Jerusalem who are in Shephrad shall possess the cities of the Negev. So let's look at that on a map of what's being said here. So I displayed this map at the beginning of this study, and now it's time to identify the territories that Israel annexed according to Obadiah 1 verses 19 through 20, which we just read. You see on the left-hand corner the ancient names, and we're going to put their modern-day equivalents with the numerical number right next to the name. Number 1 we'll start with the Negev, which is down there just sort of northeast of the Egypt border. 2, which is Mount of Esau, would be southern Jordan. Shephelah would be historically much of Judah, but historically. Philistines inhabited the Gaza area. Ephraim would be parts of central and northern Israel. Samaria, we already know that's part of the northern part of the West Bank, modern-day West Bank. Benjamin would be just a little bit of north of and a little bit east of the Dead Sea. Gilead would be a little north and east of that, probably into the Golan area, Golan Heights. Canaanites, the land of Canaan was comprised much of modern-day Israel, historically. Zarephath even reaches into the southern parts of Lebanon, just above Tyre, between Tyre and Sidon. Another supporting scripture regarding the Gaza annexation, we turn our attention to Zephaniah 2, verses 4 through 7. I've abbreviated these verses. For Gaza shall be forsaken. That's the Gaza we're talking about. Woe to the inhabitants of the seacoast. It's on the seacoast. The word of the Lord is against you, land of the Philistines. I will destroy you, so there shall be no inhabitant. The seacoast shall be pastures with shelters for shepherds and folds for flocks. The coast shall be for the remnant of the house of Judah. They shall feed their flocks there. In the house of Ashkelon they shall lie down at the evening, for the Lord their God will intervene for them. So what we might glean from these Zephaniah passages concerning Gaza is that should the Trump Gaza plan take effect, and they bulldoze those ruins and level out the area, it may not be for the redevelopment of cities that Palestinians could inhabit, but could actually be a head start for the preparation for the shepherds and folds for flocks of the seacoast for the remnant of the house of Judah. So we'll see if that has any effect there, but also there's more that Israel's going to annex. So Israel's also going to annex Jordan. We're going to turn our attention to a couple passages here in Jeremiah and Zephaniah. Jeremiah chapter 49 verse 2 reads as follows, Therefore behold the days are coming, says the Lord, that I will cause to be heard an alarm of war in Rabbah of the Ammonites. That would be northern Jordan, Ammon Jordan. It shall be a desolate mound, and her villages shall be burned with fire. Then Israel shall take possession of his inheritance, says the Lord. So we see here, in addition to the mount, Esau's mountain, southern Jordan, and Obadiah 1 verses 19 through 20, we see the northern Jordan is also going to be captured, and Israel is going to annex that territory. Also find out a supporting scripture in Zephaniah chapter 2 verses 8 and 9 regarding not only Ammon but also Moab, which would be central Jordan. I believe it's the same event, just sort of different camera angles, if you will, different details. I have heard the reproach of Moab and the insults of the people of Ammon, which they have reproached my people, and made arrogant threats against their borders. As a result of that, the residue of my people shall plunder them, and the remnant of my people shall possess them. So the IDF will win and plunder them, and the Israeli people will annex that territory. So let's broaden the scope of that map we're looking at. Not only the Obadiah 1 verses 19 through 20, but now we're looking at Jeremiah 49 and Zephaniah 2 to see that Israel is going to actually annex territory into Jordan, along with the Mount of Esau, number 2 there on the map from Obadiah's passages. So we see that Israel will annex the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, and they will annex a whole lot more than that as well. That will happen. It will be allowed. But even more than that, they're going to annex a whole lot more territory at the second coming of Jesus Christ. They'll get all of the promised land, which we find out in Genesis 15:18 is given to Abraham and his descendants. Given the land from the river of Egypt, probably the Nile, to the great river Euphrates, which courses through modern-day Iraq and Syria. And you could literally fit in about 36 of modern-day Israel into this landmass. We're going to find out that in advance they're going to get probably some of this territory as a result of the wars we just looked at. But ultimately they'll get all that land when the Messiah returns and his millennial rule and his messianic kingdom.